Hey, I'm Andy Lambert. Thank you so much for joining this session. I'm going to be sharing with you over the next 10 minutes a framework that completely changed how I both think about and approach marketing. And it's taken me a bit of time to actually get this out of my head. This has been a model that I've used building the last 2 businesses I've created, and it's something that I've struggled to give a language to until now. So I'm going to be giving you a bit of a high-level preview of what's contained within my book, but hopefully from this session you'll be able to take a load from this and apply this to your business. So let's get the boring bit out of the way and give you the intro. About 9 years or so ago now, in 2016, I co-founded a business called ContentCal. It was a social media marketing technology business. It became one of the fastest growing businesses in our space. We became one of the most well-known brands in our space too. And in 2021, the remarkable happened. We were acquired by Adobe, and now I lead product at Adobe. So in my years of building businesses, both working in sales and business development, in product and marketing orientated roles, this has been my go-to as to how I've built businesses, how I've built communities around products, and how I've scaled something from nothing. So this is an introduction to what I call the spheres of influence. So firstly, let's start with a little bit of framing, because right now I feel like they're changing a lot within marketing. And like with most things in marketing, things change yet still stays the same. And what we want to do here is show you over the next 10 or so minutes how you can systematically build a word of mouth engine around a business. Of course, we've always known that word of mouth is the most powerful way of growing a business. It always has been, it always will be. So whilst there's nothing new there, the way that we approach it needs to be structured. And I want to debunk a theory here where many people think word of mouth is random, unpredictable, impossible to scale. But in fact, it's the very opposite. It can be engineered, it can be structured, and it can be scaled as you would any other channel. And that's what I want to give you a framework for today. And to be honest, I think it's so important. It feels even more critical right now to be thinking about building our business in this way. Channels are getting saturated, engagement rates are dropping, ad costs are increasing, and into that mix we now thrown AI and how AI is changing how people discover products. And most importantly, one of the most abundant sources of leads that B2B businesses have had since the dawn of the internet has been Google. But now 60% of all Google searches end without a click. I don't want to start by all of this doomsaying, but certainly the way that we've thought about how we grow brands, particularly in B2B, because that's the context that I come from, the playbooks that we used to have, like rank for SEO, have some gated lead magnet, then run some nurture funnels off the back of that. That whole linear flow, the funnel orientated mentality, that is very much coming to an end. People are discovering products in what we'd class as dark social. They're discovering them in private communities, in WhatsApp chats, in Slack threads, and increasingly through Reddit. And the fascinating thing that's kind of being put into this big melting pot of change is the fact that, not only are people looking to their own private spheres to be inspired or educated on what product to buy, there are also, these insights that are being gleaned from all of these conversations across the internet are feeding in to LLMs. And that's changing the dynamic for how people are discovering products on products like Claude, ChatGPT, or Perplexity. That's still a very small slice of the search pie today. Google still dominates, but it's growing quickly. So as we think about the future of our businesses, we need to be considering how people discover us through AI and LLM search. So not only do we have that, we also have the known truth as well that you can see on the slides here. Like 73% of buyers will defer to their trusted networks in order to buy B2B products. And we have a broader trust crisis. Edelman produced a really interesting report called the Trust Barometer, And it talks about how trust is declining both in media, in leaders, and geopolitical powers, etc. We have a crisis of trust. And that again is changing buyer behavior, defaulting people back into those spheres that we were just talking about, into those private communities. And if you think about it, it all makes sense, right? This makes all logical sense, right? We buy products, as much as we would like to think so, we buy products on our emotional biases. We like to think we're all rational creatures, but the reality is we're not. We are emotional creatures. We buy things based on feelings and how something both makes us feel and how we are perceived from buying it. And that is deeply integrated into the networks that we spend time with, the kind of groups we want to be part of. All of that is part of that whole kind of trust network and how people inform purchasing decisions. The point is that unless people are talking about you, you will become invisible. As you know, typically a lot of our reliable discovery points around businesses are going away. Our baseline fundamental needs to always be in how can we be part of the conversation? How can we be in the right spaces where our customers are? How can we be inside the circle of trust? How do we get inside the spheres of influence of our market? And that is what I'm going to get onto now. So this is the heart of what we want to be speaking about today. The way I see it is that there are 6 spheres of influence. They start with core advocates. These are the people, when you're starting a business, and from when we started Content Cal, we didn't have a huge budget, definitely not. We didn't have a big team. No, that was very much true. There was 3 of us. But what we did have was good startings of a product and the tiny nebulous of word of mouth, where in our first conversations with people, they were like, oh, this is really good. So from that moment forth, we were encouraging people to write a review. Is there anyone else that you might recommend this to? It's those kind of little sparks that you want to build upon. These are your core advocates. Find them, nurture them, and keep them incredibly close, because they are the foundation you build from. Those people that have that initial spark of interest around your product or service. Now that goes into evangelists. So evangelists are the people that will talk about your product, irrespective of whether you pay them or not. The reason why people evangelize for something is when there is an alignment between your product and your mission. This is why declaring your mission and having such purpose for your business is so important, because it gives something for someone to anchor to. And it's that purpose that people can get behind and support and evangelize for. Evangelist is, again, a deeply rooted emotional belief. People support things because it's like a badge of honor, how it makes them feel and think and be perceived in their networks. That's why it's so important when you're building a business to stand for something important, to stand for a purpose, something that people can get behind. This is why we need to be distinctive, right? Being distinctive, being talked about is what marketing is all about. So we've got our core advocates, people that love our products, that stick with it, that will write a review, etc. And then we've got evangelists that will tell others about it. Create communities for these evangelists. And we've done this a lot within where I now work, which is at Adobe. So I now lead product for Adobe. And we've built something called the Adobe Express Insiders. Adobe Express is a product that I work on. And our Insiders group, which is on Facebook, is our group of our most loyal customers. As soon as someone had achieved a certain milestone within the product, we sent every user a prompt to come join our community. Congrats on achieving this. We'd love to get you closer. And that's how you can kind of take that, that initial spark of product enjoyment or service enjoyment and start to make people feel seen and respected and bring them closer to a community. Get their feedback, make them feel that they're part of the direction of the business and the product, and they'll feel more compelled to continue sharing, and they won't want to be paid for it either. Then that starts to expand really nicely into community leaders. When we talk about communities, it's quite a nebulous term. Some people think, oh right, I need to go create a community. But in fact, the most powerful thing you can do is find the communities that your audience already spend time in. Lots of ways that you could do that. You could simply ask ChatGPT. My favorite has always been, in every single conversation I've had with a customer or a prospect, I've always asked, one, how did you hear about us, which is just the most important information that you need to know. And two, what spaces and communities, newsletters do you read, what podcasts do you listen to, what are the spaces that educate you and inspire you around what you do. That will unfurl a gold mine of little communities you've never heard of, little WhatsApp groups and chats, little Reddit threads. It's all of those kind of little breadcrumbs that ultimately build into a wonderful sphere of word of mouth. To give you an example from what we built at Content Cal, I heard there was 2 communities that were coming up very regularly when we were starting to gain some initial traction. And I made sure I was on pretty much every customer call. And this is so important for marketers to make sure that they're always speaking to customers, getting as much intel as possible, certainly in the early days or when you're trying to build a strategy. Anyway, 2 communities kept on coming up. So I went out of my way to build relationships with those people that ran those communities. Just took them out for coffee, casually asked them about how they got into what they were doing. Just build relationship first. Again, invest in the relationship, because if you get these communities on side, you are very much investing in the long term. And the joyful thing about this is that you're building a fully defensible go-to-market strategy. When you've got the support from these community leaders, that is a moat around your business. Anyone can run a paid ad. Anyone can rank for an SEO term if you put some money behind it. Anyone can run some social ads, but not anyone will have the impetus and the knowledge and put in the hard yards to build the relationships for the communities or with the communities that influence your buyers. That truly is a defensible position that you can maintain. And throughout the whole course of our time building Content Cal, from nothing into becoming the fastest growing company in our space, it was the communities that kept that constant baseline of word of mouth growth. Yes, we ran paid ads. Yes, we did SEO. Yes, we did all of the other stuff. But there was that fundamental foundation of organic word of mouth growth. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's move on to the next one, specialist creators. Specialist creators are becoming incredibly popular right now. So these are your smaller niche creators. I've got an example here that you could look up, really good one, that demonstrates this point between eFinancial Careers and Ambersand. And Ambersand is what you would probably class as like a micro influencer. So less than 10,000 followers, really niche community. And you're finding this more, and you'll bump into this a lot as you're thinking more about how you're building your strategy. We're seeing many more people create communities, whether it's on Substack, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's on LinkedIn or whatever. In these smaller communities, people aren't necessarily going for millions of followers. It's small, tight-knit communities. Again, that speaks to these kind of trusted private networks that we continue to see evolve across social media. So working with these small creators it's not about follower count. Influencer marketing has gone beyond follower count. It's all about ICP, so ideal customer persona or profile fit, right? So we want to make sure that whoever we're working with, super tight profile, and these are the people, and this is my own personal belief. Not everyone shares this, but my own personal belief. So whenever I'm working with a micro influencer and trying to kind of bring them on board and support our mission, etc., do the same things, same approach that I would have with those community leaders. Take them out for coffee, digital or virtual, get to know them, relationship first, invest in them. What could you do to help them grow too? Is there some value exchange beyond money, right? So of course you probably need to pay some people to post about you, but actually you want to get genuine advocacy. And that's the point that I think where my approach was always a little bit different, is that many people would be happy for someone to post so long as they create a good post. I like that, but I want genuine advocacy. I want to go away from an engagement with a creator that if they turn around and speak to their peers, I want them to say Content Cal was the best product because they genuinely believed it. not because I paid for them to say it. Yes, I'll pay for them. Yes, I'll find a value exchange, like give them speaking opportunities, invite them to a podcast, whatever it is that can help them grow too and fulfill their own potential. So you're thinking of value exchange and investing beyond just a financial exchange, but you're also looking for that genuine advocacy too. Then that is quite related to the category leaders. So this is typically where you're going to need a bit more budget here. So good example of category leaders. One of my favorites here is a guy who writes, well, funnily enough, called Lenny, writes Lenny's newsletter, which is the second biggest newsletter in tech. So absolutely massive. He's done an incredible job. Started out as a specialist creator, talking very nichely about product managers, and now it's a full tech podcast. But of course, a mention from such a tight-knit community like that, a mention from Lenny is worth its weight in gold. So I don't need to tell you that, you'll know that, right? This is more traditional influencer marketing. Again, though, we're thinking more about like the true audience fit. We're not just looking for vanity numbers. We're looking for like a bullseye product market fit, audience overlap with that specialist with that category leader, sorry. So how you work with a category leader could be across multiple different formats. But again, thinking about where your audience spend the time is where you'll want to be focusing on. If your audience don't listen to podcasts, no point sponsoring a podcast. I don't need to say that, but I see so many people making very common mistakes. If your audience are reading that newsletter, if they're following that person on LinkedIn, that's where we need to be focusing on, right? So, but of course, we don't need a ton of category leaders. These are our kind of halo pieces, and we're probably thinking about these in campaigns. I would be more inclined that you get the first 4 parts of the sphere done, starting with your foundation of core advocates, building your community around your evangelists to bring them closer, then working with the communities that truly inspire your audience, building deep relationships with those community leaders, doing the same thing at a deep relationship level with the specialist creators, and then using the category leaders as your kind of like big like PR orientated moment. So work with a couple of them. Yes, they'll cost money for sure, but choose them incredibly wisely. And then finally, that then links us really nicely into domain experts. This is your halo, right? This is the PR halo to this. So this might be, if you work in tech, someone like Gartner doing a review on you, some real like tech journalists. So this probably fits a little bit more nicely into the broader PR. Again, will do nothing unless you've done the prior bits of the 6 spheres of influence, but ultimately domain experts are often like the final seal of approval that takes your brand from feeling like it's in the mix to this brand is inevitable. So hopefully that makes sense across those 6 spheres. I spent a lot of time speaking about this, but utterly critical. And this is the kind of language that I struggled to give the way that I approached building my marketing strategy, building our word of mouth engine across the business. I struggled to give a language and a framework to how this can be done. I think logically it all makes sense, but there's a practical way of how we apply this. But there's 2 other things I want to share with you before we close out today. There are 3 things that I think everyone will know, but I call them influence multipliers. So these are the things that really kickstart influence and kickstart you into building these 6 spheres of influence. And anyone can do this today. So number 1, creator-led businesses. So what we're seeing, certainly in B2B, but it's happening across B2C as well, is that personalities are leading the business. So we're seeing people hire in like creators to lead the business from maybe be a CMO because they have an audience. And I think that's a fascinating way that we're starting to see people be recruited, not because they've had 20 years in marketing or whatever. They're getting recruited because their audience is bullseye, you know, and I think that's a fascinating change into how we're bringing creators into, you know, not just working with them by paying them money. We're bringing them much closer to our business, like I was speaking about earlier, figuring out the value exchange, but it might even take another level into like, we might even offer them advisory roles in the business, part-time roles, bring them closer, bring them on as an advisor, whatever it might take. But when you feel the right creator, you feel like they got the right audience, you feel that there's a really nice fit here, this could be a really good way of approaching it. A business I'll point you to here that has done a fabulous job of this is a meeting software called TLDV. Check them out on LinkedIn. The people that you'll see, the faces behind the business, are creators that have been hired into the business. So it just goes to show, like, when you place personality and great quality content and human connection at the core of a business, magic happens, and they've become one of the fastest growing in their space. So yeah, do check out TLDV. Then founder-led growth, which is pretty linked to creator-led businesses, because essentially it's putting the human at the center of the business. For word of mouth to work, you're going to need something, like I said earlier, something for someone to hook into, some belief. And the best way of building belief in a business is by having humans represent the business. And that was a strategic move that we made at Content Cal. And certainly in the early days of building a business, your personal brand will be stronger than that of your corporate brand for a long time. And people will connect much better with you as an individual and feel much more compelled to, advocate and evangelize for your business. And then I think that links beautifully into personality-driven growth. And bonus points if you spin up all three. You imagine this, where you've got like the founder setting the mission and the vision for the business publicly, being incredibly open with how we're scaling a business. You've also got creators that are part of this too, that have been, retained to help you build this audience and create incredible content, turn up in the right spaces, etc. And then you've got the rest of the employee following suit, because you set like a drumbeat, you set expectations across the business for how we should show up online, how much we should care about how we represent ourselves online. And all of that starts to build wonderful word of mouth, because people will connect with people. So yeah, they are your influence multipliers that both kickstart and keep the word of mouth engine ticking over. Now, the final piece here, and this is the bit where many people will say, yeah, Andy, get it, fine, makes sense. I get it logically, but, I need to get sales this month. So all of this sounds like it's going to take a long time. So yes, ultimately, this isn't the work of a moment. This is the fundamentals that everyone needs to do, but they are hard yards that you need to cover. But in fact, we can simplify metrics here. And as long as we start to think right from day one about how we flip marketing metrics on its head and think differently as it relates to marketing metrics, we'll set ourselves up for success, and we will reduce that chance of, whenever we start a new initiative and it doesn't show numbers straight away, we're constantly having to defend our moves and our strategic moves. And that takes a lot of resilience and a lot of mental resource. In fact, we can make it much easier. There are 3 core categories of how we should analyze our performance. 1, memory. So we can track unaided brand recall. You can do that through surveys. But 2 other really important things is your share of search. How often are people searching for you? Very easy to see that relative to your competition. And share of voice. Honestly, share of voice is the metric I would throw every other marketing metric in the bin and just retain that one. You can use a tool called mentionalytics.com. Look at your share of voice versus your competition. The simple rule of marketing is this. If your share of voice, which ultimately relates to the percentage of people in the market speaking about you relative to your competition, if your share of voice is bigger than your competitors and bigger than your market share, you will grow and you will take that market share. That is a simple fundamental rule of marketing. If more people are speaking about you than your competition, and if you have a bigger share of voice than your market share, which we always did at Content Cal, your brand will organically grow, because it's your very easy way of seeing, are more people talking about us in the market relative to our competition? So go on to mentionalytics.com, look at your share of voice, and use that as a baseline to build everything from. You'll only want to look at that once a quarter though, because this isn't something you're going to look at every week. So then we also want to look at mentions as well, frequency in communities, content and analyst reports. You understand mentions, but this is all about how our sentiment is growing over time. Again, share of voice will cover this, but mentions matters a great deal. And then of course, we do want to track this in the bottom of funnel. And this comes under the category of momentum, inbound referrals, brand-led deal velocity, or shortened sales cycles. From experience here at Content Cal, one of the things that I was incredibly militant on was all of the sales team need to always ask that question before they could log a deal record in HubSpot. They had to ask, how did you hear about us? So long as we knew how someone heard about us, we would allow that salesperson to log that deal, get paid on it and all that kind of stuff. We had quite a sales-led inbound, but then sales-assisted sales motion. So it worked quite well for us in that scenario. But because I was so fixated on this lead source metric, and because we had such accurate data there of how did you hear about us, it meant that it was so easy for us to understand. Then when we looked at how long it took for deals to close, we could see that deals that were coming from what I'd class as word of mouth sources, which might be recommendations, communities, podcasts, newsletters, all of the stuff in the 6 spheres of influence that we were talking about. Anything that came from those sources closed in half the time and at double the price. And that was all our investors needed for us to go like, well, clearly this is the way that we should be thinking about how we grow the business. Again, you don't need all the metrics under the sun. You just need some smart ones. And I'm going to kind of close out with this. Jeff Bezos has a very popular quote and famous quote that says, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So the question here is, who's telling your story when you're not in the room? So hopefully this has been useful. I've got a whole load more stuff in my newsletter. This book has just been announced and you also have access to it for 50% off, where I go into this at much more detail to give you a playbook of how you can do all this with all of the examples in a lot more detail. It's not too onerous, it's less than 100 pages, but ultimately this is the thing that I wish I had read before I started my first business, my second business 10 years ago that ended up becoming really successful. Could have done that much quicker if I'd actually read this and didn't have to build all of this stuff on the fly. So really hope you found this useful. Thank you so much for your time. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.